My mother's fingers locked around my wrist until the skin went numb. A cold human handcuff, while outside the bathroom window, a sweep of car headlights dragged a white scar across the gloss tile. In my house, a girl's first milestone wasn't cake or candles. It was a date picked by adults for a man 2, sometimes 3 times her age. I grew up in the United States, but inside these walls the law ran different. The minute you bled, you belonged to a husband. I used to treat it like weather, something you endure, until the night I watched my cousin Mayam, barely 12, promise to a 43-year-old whose 2 previous wives hadn't lived to see 23. From then on, I studied vanishing. I ate just enough to stand and not enough to grow. Every evening, the sting of whitening cream made my eyes water. Every Friday before dawn came the smell of hot oil and the whistle of a belt cutting air when I so much as lifted my gaze. I wasn't a daughter. I was inventory. But while I learned to serve in silence, I learned something else. Exits. The bathroom window had been painted shut years ago, except the left edge where the paint spiderwebbed and curled. The rear bedroom hinge ticked faintly when the wind changed. My cousin's patrol loop clicked at the gate at 1:20, 2:05, 2:50 a.m. I didn't know when I'd need to run, only that someday I would. A mistake at school rerouted my life. I'd thrown on the wrong shirt, and my scarecrow arms gave me away. My teacher's eyes caught on the shine of small burns across my hands, then softened with a worry I wasn't used to. When she stepped out and left her desk drawer ajar, I saw thin booklets stacked like lifelines. Marriage laws, your rights as a minor, and one pamphlet stamped in bold, when culture becomes a crime. I didn't simply read, I drank. Hotline numbers, mandated reporter phrases. The way one sentence, emergency protective order, could pry open bureaucratic doors like a crowbar. I memorized until the language sat on my tongue like muscle memory. At home, the chemical sweetness of whitening cream returned, but another structure was forming in my head. In my uncle's dilapidated tool shed, between a mower with a split belt and a rake missing 3 teeth, I started a midnight class. 6 younger cousins, not yet bleeding, breathing in sawdust and fear while I taught them to say the one line that forces action. They are forcing me to marry. I'm 13. Please help. We mapped the family courthouse. We coded hotline numbers as math problems inside our notebooks. We practiced knocking on a nurse's door and asking for the red folder, the one for mandated reports. The notebooks became atlases. CPS became a finish line if every other door slammed shut. Inside the house, the Friday ritual still ruled, 1 a.m. to 10 a.m., serve and do not speak. The kitchen sang with metal, heat breathed against my face, oil licked my wrists, and the handles of cast iron left half-moons burned into my palms. Oddly, pain became rehearsal. If I could hold a pot until the flesh screamed, maybe I could hold a window frame while the lock fought back. Late that night, sliding my slim notebook into the shed's loose plank, I heard the faintest crunch on gravel, footsteps pausing at the door, a hand testing the iron latch. It didn't open. The steps receded. The gap in the wood looked thin as a paper cut, but it told me one thing. Someone had started to notice. That night, I tested the edge of paint with my thumbnail. It flaked beneath the pressure, and then a cone of light pinned the frosted glass from outside. I froze with white dust on my fingertips and understood. An exit isn't a plan until you willing to use it. The morning it happened in the kitchen. A single red crescent bled through white cloth, bright as a warning flare. Aunties cheered like I'd won a prize. I was lifted, not as a girl, but as an offering, while a name slid across the room like a knife, a construction magnate whose 2 brides were buried before 23. The wedding date landed 2 weeks out. Inside my skull, a timer began to shriek. The same week, Anna, one of our shed girls, bled too. Within hours, she was promised to a 51-year-old with 8 children older than she was. I watched the light leave her eyes as adults debated numbers that sounded like livestock. I palmed my notebook into her hands. Shelters, maps, the exact sentence for the science teacher. Tomorrow, period 3, our eyes agreed. I believed I had 14 days to build a better escape. The board flipped before I could place a piece. That night, a hard, official knock shook our front door. CPS. They asked about underage engagements. They asked to speak to every girl under 18. My father's face traveled from polite confusion to a red, rigid rage. The house turned predatory. Drawers yanked, cushions gutted, the tool shed searched. My notebook surfaced and burned, ink blistering, paper turning to black petals on a dinner plate. Words slammed into me next. Diseased, contaminated, a cancer to cut out, like thrown stones that don't leave visible bruises. My father announced the date had moved to tomorrow morning. I looked at the bathroom window with paint already spidered, listened to shoes crunch the yard on patrol, smelled the acrid ghost of my notebook in the air, and understood that tonight the exit had to stop being theory and become a route. Dawn was supposed to bring silk and gold, a red dress, and a convoy of cars. Instead, it brought a plan that tasted like metal on my tongue. I woke before anyone, pretended to sleep, then counted the familiar noises: pipes coughing, a cousin's alarm, the scrape of a gate latch. When my mother finally swept in, bangles whispering against one another, she told me to rise and be grateful. I curled, pressed my palms to my stomach, and let my breath climb into small, panicked gasps. "Get up," she said. "The beautician will be here in 30 minutes. "Something's wrong," I whispered. "I need the bathroom." Her face pinched. A sick bride was bad luck. 5 minutes, she snapped, releasing my arm like I was contaminated. The bathroom smelled of lemon cleaner and old paint. I locked the door, climbed onto the toilet, and pushed at the window's left edge where the color had spidered. It held. I dug a butter knife from the cabinet's back, stolen weeks ago, and worked the seam, paint cracking under the blade with soft, sinful pops. Sweat crawled down my spine. I flushed the toilet once to buy noise, ran the tap, moaned like a bad omen. Fists thudded against the door. "Open!" came my aunt's voice, breathless with offense. I shoved the hidden plastic bag. Rolled leggings, a t-shirt, a tiny wrapped bar of soap, a fold of rewritten shelter addresses, into the ceiling's loose tile, then actually used the toilet to keep up the illusion. Another minute. Another set of knuckles. The knife nicked my thumb. A single dot of blood bloomed and smeared into the old paint like a signature. The frame gave with a cough. Cold morning air pressed in, smelling like wet-cut grass and car exhaust. The opening was small, meant for air, not escape, but the months I'd starved for bought me inches. I wriggled my bag through first, listened to it thump onto the narrow sill outside, then turned my shoulders sideways and pushed. Wood kissed skin and raised welts. Behind me, the lock began to whine under pressure, screws protesting. Someone brought a heavier shoulder. I slid until my hips caught and wouldn't go. I exhaled everything I had and twisted, ribs grating. The latch cracked. The door shuttered once, twice, and exploded inward. I dropped into the wet grass and rolled, ankle twisting with a hot spark. Voices collided above and behind me. I ran barefoot, nightgown snapping against my knees, the morning damp turning the lawn into a cold tongue. The neighborhood was a grid of near clones. Same roofs, same hedges, same community eyes. I cut a diagonal, Hassan's side yard, past the Mahmoud's pool cover slick with dew, around Sal's leaning shed. Dogs announced me to anyone listening. Motion lights popped like flashbulbs. An engine coughed to life. Another answered. Gravel hissed under tires. I tucked behind 2 trash bins as headlights combed the cul-de-sac and then sprinted again, adrenaline turning my lungs into bellows and my feet into knives. The bus stop lived 4 blocks away, and today the blocks unfolded like a bad dream. A shard of glass bit into my heel and nested there. I tasted copper where I'd bitten my tongue. Kareem shouted from a street over. "Left!" Omar barked. A car bounced the curb somewhere behind me. I dove through a rose hedge and came out scored with thorns, dress stringing itself with tiny red beads. The bus shrugged into view at the top of the road, doors open, light warm as a kitchen. I reached it with nothing in my hands but a prayer. The driver, a woman with tired eyes and a perfect braid, looked at my bare feet, my gown, the smear of paint on my arm. "Downtown?" I managed. "I'll pay you back." She nodded once. A woman in the first row stood, pressed coins into the machine, didn't ask a single question, and guided me into a seat. We pulled away as a familiar sedan swung into the lot too fast, tires yelping. I ducked low. The woman beside me shifted her body, a soft barricade between me and the window, and pressed a handful of tissues into my palm. "Breathe," she said. "You're on your way." By the courthouse, my legs were wood and my heel throbbed with the beat of my heart. Security glanced at the bloody prints I left on the marble and waved me through anyway. At the family clerk O's window, I said the words ID drilled under blankets at 2 a.m. Emergency protective order. I'm 15. They're forcing me to marry today. Paper appeared. A pen appeared. A judge appeared faster than anyone should on a Saturday. He read, face flattening, and said one word I'd been chasing for months. Granted. The paper weighed almost nothing and felt heavier than a door. The shelter was 12 blocks away. I made it 3 before the phone call told me what I already feared. No beds until Thursday. I sat on the curb, aching, order in one hand like a talisman that couldn't also be a roof. A car rolled past slowly. I stood and started moving again. I had another address, if not a bed. The school, the red pen, the unlocked drawer, the only adult who'd ever handed me a crowbar made of words. I took 3 buses, hiding in the dip of my seat, watching the windows for familiar faces. Jefferson High was supposed to be empty, but her car waited like it always did on weekends. I climbed the last stairs on my toes, knocked, and walked into a room that smelled like dry erase markers and the kind of patience that mends broken things. Ms. Rodriguez dropped her pen when she saw my feet. She crossed the room in 2 strides, and her voice, which I'd only heard correction soft or lecture bright, turned into something else entirely. She sat me, fetched the nurse's kit that lived in the storage closet, and began to work like a person accustomed to turning chaos into steps. Rinse, tweeze, bandage, breathe. I told her about the paper. I told her about the shelter's waitlist. She dialed numbers in a spiral: CPS hotline, an on-call supervisor, legal aid, the district liaison for emergencies. The answers rhymed with one another. Without immediate danger, without visible, documented harm, without a place to put me tonight. My phone erupted again and again. Mother, father, cousin, unlisted, and she took it without asking, turned it off, then back on only to wipe it clean. "Factory reset," she said. "They're tracking you." Car doors banged outside. Voices bled down the hallway, English and Arabic braided together. "We know she's here," my father called in his business voice, the one he wore to charm and corner. "She's sick. She needs her medication." He tried the handle, tapped politely, then leaned. Ms. Rodriguez slid the bolt and pulled the blinds in a single, practiced motion. "Quiet," she whispered, then looked at my wrists and the map of small burns across my hands. "May I?" She raised her phone. I nodded. Her pictures were not art. They were evidence. The raised half-moons from iron handles. The fresh bruises at my shoulders from this morning's struggle over the dress. A photo of my heel with the glass removed and placed beside it for scale. She called 911, voice level, called the security office too. Mr. Williams appeared with a ring of keys and a radio and promised cameras were on. By the time the police arrived, my father had transformed into a portrait. Impeccable suit, prescriptions with my name printed tidy, a line of uncles with concerned faces. "My daughter is mentally ill," he told the officers, as if he were briefing colleagues. "She runs. She makes up stories. We just want her home where she can be safe." The officers separated us as procedure demands. One stayed with us while another took my father and uncles to the hallway. "She's never been medicated," Ms. Rodriguez said, hands still, voice firm. "I've had her in class for 2 years. Look at the injuries." The officer's eyes moved. He was polite. He was cautious. He said the cuts and bruises could be self-inflicted if I was in an episode. He said the bottles had labels. He said a lot of things that made sense if you'd never been inside a house where culture got weaponized into a muzzle. "Check the fill dates," I said. "Check the doctor. If I'm so ill, where are my therapy notes? My school interventions? Why does my attendance look like clockwork?" Ms. Rodriguez opened her laptop and pulled up essays I'd written. Food traditions, cooking lessons, fasting, little vignettes whose metaphors were louder now that someone was willing to hear them. The officer read and his frown settled deeper, not at me, but at the way we'd been polite to our own harm. Mr. Williams knocked once and stepped in with his phone held like a torch. He had footage. My father and uncles arriving already holding the prescription bottles they now claimed were urgently needed from home. The officer asked for the video. He asked for the labels. He asked for the pediatrician's records. A small, unglamorous accumulation of facts began to tower. My phone pulsed on the desk. A new number. A text that said family and curse in the same sentence. Ms. Rodriguez photographed that too. Paperwork multiplied. Names were spelled out loud. Somewhere in the building, a ball bounced in a gym. Somewhere outside, a bell marked an hour. I tried to make my breath match it and failed. When CPS called back, the answer was almost what we needed. Emergency placement might be possible if we could demonstrate immediate risk. She ran from a wedding scheduled for this morning, Ms. Rodriguez said. There are multiple adult males in the hallway attempting entry. The dispatcher's voice shifted. Document everything, she said. If there's an attempt to breach, call again. We'll expedite. The handle stuttered a final time, then stopped. Footsteps retreated. My father decided to move his theater to where officers could see it. He praised the police for their quick response. He held up the bottles so the labels caught the light. He asked if he could take me home now that everything was sorted. The officers told him no. He smiled like that answer was expected. In the lull, Ms. Rodriguez dialed one more number. Theodora? She said when the line picked up. I need a favor, an emergency one. They put us in a conference room with bad carpeting and a clock that ticked too loud. The officer took statements, mine, Ms. Rodriguez's, Mr. Williams's, and promised to request the pediatrician's files. He asked if I'd ever been left alone during appointments. I shook my head. He didn't write that down. He drew a small star beside it. Then my father made his mistake. When the officers stepped into the hall to confer, my father's voice rose and slipped, talking to his brothers in a rush of Arabic I translated in my head by reflex. Call the lawyer, he said. The dowry is non-refundable. The word sat, heavy and wrong, in a place where he'd been insisting all morning this was about my health. An officer returned, caught the tail of it, and asked for clarification. My father smiled thinly. My English, he said, though his English had served him perfectly well 100 times. The officer didn't smile back. The CPS supervisor arrived in person, a woman whose blazer had seen too many weekends. She looked at my feet and the stack of photos and the video of my father entering with medication he supposedly rushed out to fetch and nodded once. Emergency protective custody, she said to the officers. We'll need a placement tonight. Ms. Rodriguez exhaled like someone had finally set down one end of a heavy table she'd been carrying alone. The nearest shelters were still full. The first foster options were wrong. Too porous, too close, too inexperienced with cases where families don't accept no. We need secure and quiet, the supervisor said. Preferably someone who has handled cultural retaliation. Ms. Rodriguez already had a name on her tongue. Theodora Whitman, she said. Retired nurse. Certified for emergency placements. She has cameras and a fence and a way of speaking that makes people behave. The supervisor called. The answer came back yes. They wheeled me through the hallway because my heel had begun to swell, and because moving me quickly through a public school on a Saturday, when a dozen adult men lingered outside, required a theater of our own. My father tried to intercept once more, presented the officers with a pair of prescription bottles with my name, the labels so new the ink still looked damp. She needs these, he insisted. She is not in her right mind. The officer checked the timestamp on the label, checked the video time code, and then checked nothing else. He didn't need to. We passed the front doors as a patrol car pulled closer to the curb, blocking a clean line to the entrance. In the glass, I saw my mother's face for the first time that day. Eyes rimmed red, mouth set with the kind of devastation that can be real while still being a weapon. She didn't look at me. She looked through me, as if focusing on whatever story the community would be told next. Theodora's house sat in a neighborhood where fences actually meant something. Cameras blinked from the corners like patient eyes. She opened the door before we could knock and smelled like laundry soap and peppermint. She glanced at my bandaged heel, at the lingering tremor in my hands, at the paper in its plastic sleeve, and ushered us in with movements that had nothing to prove. Bathroom down the hall, she said. Lock on the inside for your peace of mind. Windows alarmed. You can sleep. Sleep didn't arrive. I lay in a bed that wasn't mine and watched the ceiling shift as car lights passed, listened to the house learn the shape of me. At 3 a.m., Theodora found me at the window. "They came for the last girl," she said, as if reading the scene my brain kept screening. "Father and 3 brothers. The response time to this address is under 2 minutes now." She handed me a glass of water. "Drink. You need your voice back." Morning brought paperwork and a list of rules that were less prison than choreography. Vary routes, learn neighbors' names, keep the new phone number truly new, never open the door to an apology dressed as a casserole. Ms. Rodriguez returned with groceries and a look that said she would die on this hill if asked. The supervisor called with an update. The pediatrician had confirmed what we knew, that appointments were never private, that concerns had been deflected by a parent who answered for me. The officer had the pharmacies fill logs too. The dates told their own story. At noon, the doorbell rang. The camera showed my aunt and 2 cousins holding foil pans and a sign that said, "We love you. Come home." Theodora called the non-emergency police line and narrated the protective order clause like she was reciting a recipe. The pans went cold on the stoop. The sign blurred in the lens as the wind took it. By late afternoon, word had spread. A post with my photo bloomed on my father's Facebook page, a plea framed as love. "She is very sick. She needs medication. Outside, people have filled her head with lies. Please help us find her." Shares multiplied. Comments came in phrases you could paste onto any family drama and the shape would still fit. The legal aid attorney, Patricia, phoned and told us not to engage, to screenshot everything, to let the lawyers do their work. The day ended the way new days do when you've pulled yourself through a window and into a different life. Quietly, with a list on the fridge and a pair of shoes by the door that fit a little better than the ones you ran in. Somewhere between the camera's soft IR pulse and the hum of the refrigerator, my body believed enough to rest. The order slept on the nightstand. The phone slept face down. The house breathed around me like a creature on my side. Theodora's house taught me how quiet can be its own kind of therapy. Morning light threaded the blinds and laid bars of gold across the floor. The cameras winked their little red eyelids and kept the perimeter honest. A chalkboard in the kitchen listed rules in a neat hand. Call if followed, call if approached, call before answering, and beneath them a grocery list, written like a promise: bread, eggs, bandages, mint tea. It smelled like laundry and boiled chicken and the faint pepper of antiseptic. I made a bed with military corners because order felt like a language I could still speak. Flowers arrived on the second day, a bouquet so large it seemed to eat the front door. A white card peered out from the green. "Our hearts are broken. Please forgive us. Love, Mama." Theodora photographed it from 4 angles, including the sender's sticker, then carried it to the bin like a bomb. "Apologies come with paperwork now," she said. "If your mother wants forgiveness, she can apologize under oath." Her voice was calm, but her hands had the square grace of someone who knows how to compress a wound. By afternoon, the apology had metastasized into a campaign. My father's Facebook post, airbrushed into righteousness, had gathered comments like burrs. An aunt asking for prayers. A neighbor claiming they'd seen me wandering behind a strip mall. Unwell. Men ID called uncle pledging to help bring our girl home to the proper care she needs. Patricia, the attorney, instructed us to archive everything and not reply. "They're building a narrative," she said over the phone. "We build a case." The next day, a car idled across the street long enough to be noticed. When Theodora stepped out with her phone at shoulder height, the car crept forward and turned very carefully away, as if not to startle the truth. A neighbor texted a photo of 2 men taking pictures of the house, one pretending to check his watch whenever the lens swung toward our address. Theodora's finger hovered over the alarm panel like a pianist at the end of a difficult bar. "They're measuring you," she said. "We measure back." I started school again, not the school I'd fled, but one in a district where the registrar's office knew how to file my name under layers. The counselor, a woman with gray at the temples and a stack of bracelets that chimed when she moved, walked me past the library and to a corner table with 2 chairs. "You can eat here if the cafeteria is a lot," she offered. "The monitors know not to ask questions." She tapped the table. "There's a panic button under this edge. Not because we expect it, but because we plan for it." That first week passed in odd increments. I learned a new bus route that cut away from the obvious stops. I learned which neighbors' dogs barked at leaves and which saved their voices for people. At night, Theodora and I did drills the way other households practiced fire escapes, where to stand when you call, how to describe a car, what not to say because the law will say it better. Ms. Rodriguez came by with a paper bag of simple things that felt extravagant. Cotton socks, a second toothbrush. Notebooks with covers that didn't to scream the contents, then stood too long in the doorway like she was talking herself out of a hug. Theodora hugged her for both of us. On Wednesday, I saw a work truck I knew from a mile away. It bore my uncle's company logo, washed clean like it had just come off the lot, and it sat across the street from school in a way that suggested accidental. I turned on my heel and walked back inside before the doors had finished closing. The counselor appeared as if conjured, phone in hand, expression already set to "I believe you." Theodora arrived 10 minutes later and parked behind the truck, nose to bumper, camera up, chin out. The men inside slouched lower and drove away at the speed of guilt. Legal papers came by courier on Thursday, plopped onto Theodora's mat by a man who didn't make eye contact. The motion's language was dense and oily. Parental alienation, cultural disconnection, dangerous outside influences. My father asked the court to return me to his custody and to sanction the actors who had removed me. Patricia read it once and snorted softly. "Boilerplate," she said. "They're throwing spaghetti at the system to see what sticks." Still, she began to stack our own papers in a crisp, intentional pile. Photos, timestamps, the EPO, statements, a list of every attempt at contact since the order. "We win by being boring," she reminded me. "Documentation wins." Friday morning, I opened my eyes to a different tone of quiet, the kind that comes before a thunderclap you don't yet hear. Theodora's doorbell chimed and her intercom crackled. On the camera, my aunt stood with my two female cousins, their scarves just so, their faces arranged with practiced sorrow. They carried foil pans that sweated on top from the heat of something sweet. "We know she's here," my aunt said to the lens. "We only want to talk. Her grandmother is sick." Theodora didn't press the speak button. She dialed the non-emergency number and read aloud the protective order clause about third-party contact while the operator typed. A patrol car rolled by. The foil pans cooled. My cousins held up a sign to the camera as they retreated. "We love you. Come home." Theodora saved the clip. The campaign shifted gears that weekend. A video surfaced of my younger cousin Margie sitting very straight beside her mother, eyes glassy, voice too deliberate. She said I'd filled her head with lies, told her our parents wanted to sell us, made her fear her own culture. 4 other girls from our shed sat behind her like solemn punctuation. I knew the posture of girls being watched by someone over the camera. I also knew what the comments would say. Poor family, brainwashing. This is what happens when children forget who they are. The retired officer who lived beneath my new safe apartment told me not to watch further. He set a mug of tea in front of me like a barricade and turned the laptop around to face the wall. That night, sleep felt like a permission I hadn't earned. I lay awake and recited addresses until dawn, the way some people pray. Mid-morning, the doorbell rang again, less of a chime and more of a bite. The camera showed a young woman in a dark wig and office clothes, a leather folder tucked to her ribs. "Delivery for the minor child," she announced to the lens, and turned to drop an envelope in the mailbox. The profile was wrong and familiar at the same time. I moved toward the window without deciding to. Theodora's hand closed around my elbow. "Wait!" The woman looked up and met my eyes. For a second, the wig became hair and the office costume went transparent. My cousin Sarah blinked hard, leaving a wetness she wiped away angrily, then walked back to her car as if the house were just a curb in her day. Inside the envelope, photographs, my grandmother in her chair, pale under a crocheted blanket. My little sister in front of a cake I could smell just from the picture. My mother at the stove cooking my favorite dish, tears tracking like salt on her cheek. They were the kind of images you send to someone who has wronged you in an ordinary way. At the bottom was a photo that hadn't learned to lie as well. Anna stood between her parents wearing a ring that bit the light, eyes flat as a lake in drought. On the back of the glossy paper, someone's square hand had written, "She came home. She's happy now. You could be too." I called Patricia. She cursed in a tone that sounded like a prayer stripped of its manners. "They're preparing for court," she said. And they're trying to unspool your credibility ahead of it. We'll answer in the only language courts speak: witnesses and evidence. She booked a date for a full hearing on the protective order, told me what to wear, what not to say, how to hold a silence that someone else would rush to fill if it was uncomfortable for them. "You are not on trial," she said, "but they will try to put you there anyway." Theodora sharpened the house. She checked batteries, tested alarms, replaced a bulb over the back porch camera. I set my clothes out like armor and tucked the paper order into a sleeve I could reach without looking. When I turned off the kitchen light, the window became a mirror, and for a second I saw two versions of myself. One erased from a family tree, and one etched into her own life in a hand that wouldn't be sanded out. I went to bed beside the hum of a house that had chosen me. Somewhere far off, a siren threaded the night like a red seam. Theodora paused in my doorway and said, "Tomorrow, we go tell the truth where it counts." I slept. Morning made the truth look ordinary again. Toast crumbs on a plate, a scuffed shoe, a pen rolling in the dip where the table is older than its polish. Patricia texted to meet at the courthouse entrance by the blue bench. Theodora tucked peppermint in her bag. I tucked the order in mine. We locked the door and walked out, and the cameras blinked the way guardians do when they'll be here when you get back. At the courthouse steps, my family had gathered the way storms gather, wide and sudden. Suits and silk and measured expressions. Community leaders beside them like bookends. The imam from our mosque talking to my father in low, careful tones. The air felt like metal on my tongue again. Patricia's hand hovered near my elbow without touching. A presence, not a restraint. "This is where they're strongest," she said softly. "Inside is where you are." We walked in. The courtroom had old carpet and newer microphones, a wooden clock that ticked a hair fast, and a judge who wore her years like someone who understood how much broke in front of her, and how little could actually be mended from that height. My entire extended family poured into the left side like water finding its level. Uncles squared, aunties composed, cousins rehearsed into silence. My mother sat in the front row with a folded handkerchief and a face that could be read 6 ways, each one selecting a different audience. I took my seat beside Patricia and looked at my knees until the benches stopped creaking. My father's lawyer went first. He had the practiced warmth of a man who could sell a bridge someone was already standing on. He spoke of cultural context, of misunderstanding, of a daughter in crisis misled by Western ideas that prey on impressionable minds. He did not say the word control. He did say love in 15 configurations. Character witnesses came and took their turns. An uncle whose hands shook just enough to read as love. A neighbor who had known me since birth and never seen a bruise. The imam careful trying to hold 2 truths and not be crushed between them. My pediatrician testified by phone that he had observed no signs of abuse. No one mentioned the presence of a parent in every exam room like another wall. Patricia did not roll her eyes. She took notes. When it was our turn, she began like drizzle and became weather. She laid the EPO on the table like a physical fact. She offered the photographs, burn marks shaped like cookware, the belt tracks like pale vines, my heel with the glass beside it as if the picture were a diagram. She called Ms. Rodriguez, who sat straighter than I'd ever seen her sit in a classroom, and asked her to speak only to what she had seen, not what she thought. Ms. Rodriguez described my weight loss, my essays, softly coded stories that now read like confessions, and the morning I arrived barefoot and bleeding with a court paper in my fist. She passed up the video Mr. Williams had saved of my father arriving with bottles he later claimed he'd raced home to retrieve. My father's lawyer cross-examined like a man pulling a scarf from a sleeve and hoping for a snake. "Did you file a report when you first suspected abuse?" he asked. Ms. Rodriguez answered truthfully. "I built trust first," she said. "I feared losing access to her if I exposed her too soon." He pounced. "So you did not follow the law?" "I followed a frightened child," she said. Patricia objected to the characterization. The judge sustained. The scarf stayed a scarf. Then I took the stand. I had practiced sitting, practiced breathing, practiced finding a fixed point in the middle distance so my mother's tears didn't turn me into something soft. Patricia kept me with the facts. The hours in the kitchen, the paint on the window, the hands that held me down when the dress was forced over my head, the name of the man with dead wives, the ring on Anna's hand with no light left under it. She asked about the pediatrician's appointments. I said I was never alone. She asked about the prescriptions. I said the dates didn't line up. I did not say I was scared. I did not need to. Fear had worn a path across my language, and anyone willing to look could see it. The judge asked a few questions of her own, small and precise. How did you know to come for an emergency protective order? A pamphlet in my teacher's drawer, I said. I memorized it. Why did you not seek aid sooner? Because I thought it was normal, I said, and heard the room breathe once as if surprised to find itself human. My father's lawyer stood and said kidney failure can follow pregnancy, but is not proof of harm. That girls in our community marry young in ways outsiders fail to understand, that my claims were hysterical and my allies were zealots. He asked if I knew I had brought shame to an entire family. Patricia rose before the judge needed to tell her to and said, "Objection." The judge said, "Sustained." The words crossed the room like a drawbridge lowering over a moat that had gotten too wide. Patricia was about to rest when the courtroom doors opened and the air changed the way rooms do when someone walks in carrying a story heavy enough to tilt the floor. A CPS worker stepped through, followed by a young woman in a simple dress and a headscarf, not timid, but careful. The worker apologized for the interruption and said the witness had just arrived with information material to the case. My father turned to stone and then to powder and then back to stone. The woman gave her name to the clerk and then to the judge. I was his first wife, she said, and the note-taker's pen slowed as if the sentence were a hill. I did not die. A sound rippled through my family's side of the room, quick and angry and shaped like denial. The judge lifted a palm, and the sound quieted, not because of the palm, but because of what the palm represented. She was 25 now, she said, and she had married him at 15. She had 4 children and kidneys that failed like doors whose hinges were oiled too late. Her family had told those who asked that she died, because the story of a dead girl was neater than the story of a girl who left. A nurse had helped her run, tucking her into a shelter the way a mother might tuck a blanket around a fever. She had disappeared because staying meant dying in a way a headstone could not explain. She had medical records. She had photos of the grave her family used as proof. The CPS worker passed copies to the clerk and then to counsel's tables, papers that made the air feel heavier, because belief has weight when it becomes evidence. My father's lawyer tried to object to the relevance. The judge asked him if he was serious. He tried to discredit her. She answered like a person who has already lost everything she was told a woman is supposed to be, and discovered that life continues anyway. She described being forced to conceive as soon as bleeding stopped each time, as if her body were a field obligated to harvest twice in one season. She described the beatings that never bruised where a dress couldn't hide them. She did not cry. She did not have to. When she finished, the judge's questions were not the kind that misunderstand. Did your family know? Yes. Did they lie about your death? Yes. Would they have given another girl to him? She looked at me then, and all the rows of wood and ritual, all the microphones and stenography, all the language that turns harm into statute, felt briefly like a scaffold we might actually climb, instead of a machine that chews the people it is supposed to protect. Yes, she said. They were ready. The judge ruled without flourish. The emergency order became permanent. My parents were barred from contact, direct or through agents, with criminal penalties for violation. The court acknowledged credible threats, credible evidence, credible harm. My father stood and called me dead in a language the court didn't understand, but rage translates poorly when the gavel has fallen. The judge told him to sit. My mother took off her scarf with a deliberation meant for the audience that would hear about it later and declared me erased. The clerk kept typing. Erasure is a family art. On paper, it doesn't exist. Walking out, the hall seemed longer than when we entered, as if the building had stretched to fit what had just been said inside it. Family members turned their shoulders so I would see their backs. Some spat into the imaginary space where my name used to live. Patricia touched my sleeve and did not say well done because this wasn't a competition with a medal at the end. The CPS worker escorted the first wife past my row, and for a second we were the only 2 people in the corridor. Thank you, I said, which was wrong for what it cost her and right for what it gave me. You're not alone, she said, which was wrong for the nights to come and right for how I would survive them. Outside, Theodora had the car already pointed toward the exit. Paparazzi didn't wait for girls like me, but 2 reporters with local badges had appeared, sniffing a story made of law and community and the kind of word that makes editors nervous. Patricia steered me past. "Not yet," she said. "Let them write about the order. They can meet the person later." On the courthouse steps, my father held a press conference of one, back straight, voice lifted, accusing the heir of stealing his daughter. Community men clustered behind him to lend him height. It looked like a victory photograph to someone who doesn't know how court orders work. To me, it looked like a man who needed to perform his story before his audience changed channels. We drove. The city slid by like a tired animal finding shade. In the back seat, I held the paper that said permanent the way you hold a passport in a foreign airport. It was not salvation. It was a document. It would, for now, be enough to keep doors shut that had once opened too easily. At a red light, Theodora reached back and placed a peppermint on my knee. "For your breath," she said. For my voice, I thought. For whatever came next. The order said permanent in ink that would outlast this week. Maybe this year. But not the parts of people that believe themselves above paper. When we got home from court, the sun had already turned oblong on Theodora's porch. The cameras blinked awake as if they'd been napping for us. Theodora slid the order into a clear sleeve and taped a copy just inside the front window at eye level. "For anyone who claims they didn't know," she said, smoothing the corners with the same careful hands that had learned the bodies of patients for decades. The phone started first. Unknown numbers bloomed like mold. I turned the device face down and heard it vibrate across the table until Theodora tucked it under a hand towel like you does to calm a hummingbird in a shoebox. Patricia texted from an office still lit. Screenshot, archive, no replies. "We answer in court, not comments." A few minutes later, she sent a second message. "Proud of you is not a legal term, but I am." The apology campaign rebranded overnight. "Our daughter has been misled," my father said into a camera on the courthouse steps in a clip that crawled across Facebook feeds and family group chats. "She is ill. We love her. We forgive her. We will fight for her." Forgiveness tasted like a threat dressed for Sunday. In the comments, women posted prayer hand emojis. Men offered trucks. Someone promised a reward for information, then deleted it. Then someone else reposted a screenshot of the deletion with a caption about truth. Theodora saved everything to a folder named with the date and a word no one could misinterpret: intimidation. By morning, the soft knives arrived. A bakery Theodora frequented put her order on hold when she called. "Sorry. We were having trouble with our system today, and the hardware store insisted the locks she needed weren't a T in stock anymore, even though they stared at her from a pegboard behind the clerk's shoulder." She drove home with a paper bag of bread from a further market and a jaw set to a line. "People think neutrality is safe," she said, setting the loaf down like a gavel. "Neutrality is just choosing the side that makes noise." That afternoon, legal envelopes began to thump onto the mat like fish being dropped from a height. Civil filings, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, interference with parental rights. Patricia called them slaps and told us the cure was sunlight and time. "They want to make defense your day job," she said. "We will not let them." She filed anti-slap motions and told me which interviews to decline and which reporters to let leave their cards without promises. "Your story is not a chew toy," she said. "We pick when and how it's told." Theodora tightened the house like a ship before weather. She walked the perimeter at twilight with a mechanic's clipboard, marking dead bulbs, checking the screws on camera brackets, oiling the gate latch that squealed when it got damp. She taught me the sound map of our block: Mr. Nguyen's porch door that thumped twice because the frame was misaligned, the teenage skateboard that clicked on the crack by the mailbox, and where each noise should be at what hour. "Routine is both a comfort and a leak," she said. "We'll keep the comfort and patch the leaks." The first night after court, I slept in 12-minute segments. Each time I surfaced, I rehearsed the exact phrasing the order used. Respondents are prohibited from direct or third-party contact, until the legalese turned into a lullaby because it didn't T-bend even when my fear did. At 3 a.m., the camera's IR LED painted the driveway in eerie daylight. 2 figures, hoods up, shoulders hunched, moved through the periphery like men who wanted to be ideas instead of faces. They didn't approach the door. They paced the curb as if reading the air. Theodora touched the screen of her phone, and the street filled with the slow wail of a cruiser that had been idling 2 blocks away. The figures melted into the wrong end of the block. The officer drove past without stopping, just fast enough to let the night know it was watched. In the morning, the Freedom Network did not yet exist, but the idea of it began to stack itself in the corner of my mind, like those pamphlets, only sturdier. Ms. Rodriguez came by with printer paper and toner, a joke gift that wasn't a joke at all. She set them next to a small laminator she'd borrowed from the library. "When we're ready," she said, and didn't define we, because it was too big to fit in that kitchen and too small not to start there. At school, the counselor adjusted my schedule so I could slip between classes along corridors monitored by people who knew the backstory, without needing the footnotes. She had a list of teachers who would write bathroom passes without question, and a second list of teachers who would ask 4 questions too many. She starred the first list and told me to memorize those rooms like exits. "You will get through the day and then the day after," she said, tapping the panic button under the library table as if to make sure gravity still worked. "The goal isn't to look brave. The goal is to get to graduation with your lungs still inside your ribs." On Wednesday, a car I didn't recognize parked across from the school and stayed long enough to not be a coincidence. The plate had a frame from a dealership 3 towns over. The man inside wore a baseball cap pulled low and the bland face of someone practicing forgettability. I called Theodora from the counselor's office, and she arrived like a small practice storm, parking directly in front of the car so his dash cam, if he had one, would frame her chin and her badge-shaped stance. She filmed him filming the school and narrated into her phone with the tone nurses use for charts. Vehicle present 15 minutes, male driver not apparent on pickup list, plate number. The man started his engine and executed the world's slowest lawful U-turn. That night, the videos multiplied. A cousin I hadn't seen in years appeared on my screen reciting about me as if she'd memorized a weather report. A front of lies. A low pressure of Western rot, a girl swept into a climate that made her blame the people who loved her. Her mother sat at her elbow, nodding offbeat with each sentence. Comments did the rest of the choreography. Someone said I'd always been dramatic. Someone else said girls my age needed discipline. A third said the court would see reason when the frenzy cooled. The retired officer under my apartment knocked once on the ceiling like a friend nudging a shoulder. I closed the laptop and let the room go quiet enough that I could hear my own pulse and decide not to panic at its speed. 2 days later, Theodora came home with the kind of tired that makes grocery bags look heavier than they are. 3 places today, she said, putting carrots into the fridge like she was stacking bricks. 3 places where people smiled while saying no. She set a small bag on the counter with a gentle clink. Inside, new locks, a can of camera-safe spray that repels rain on lenses, tiny screws that bite harder into wood. "Not everyone is afraid," she added, and slid a note across to me from a neighbor 2 houses down. "If you need a place to duck, my porch light is code. 2 quick, 1 long." I folded the paper like a good luck charm and tucked it into my pocket. Saturday, a letter with a return address from our mosque arrived, hand-delivered, the envelope thick with intention. Theodora photographed it unopened, then slid it along the top with a butter knife. Inside, layers. A formal statement about community harmony, a personal note from the imam urging reconciliation, and a flyer for a cultural mediation service that specialized in bringing families together across misunderstanding. I could see the shape of the trap from here. Meetings where love is the subject and compliance the conclusion. We documented, filed, did not reply. That evening, as the sky bruised itself purple, the intercom crackled again. The camera showed 2 men at the end of the walk, hands visible, no foil pans, no wig. They didn't approach the step. One raised a phone and began a slow, panoramic video of the front of the house, sweeping the lens from camera to camera like counting coup. The other pointed to the copy of the order in the window and laughed, a small, mean sound that the microphone caught and flattened. Theodora pressed the alarm panel and spoke into the speaker with the starch of an ICU charge nurse. "You are on a recorded line. You are in violation of a protective order. Leave now." They left like ideas leave when the sentence ends. It should have felt like enough. It didn't. Paper protects doors. It does not warm bones. I showered with the bathroom door unlocked because Theodora said the lock on that door sticks sometimes, and I should be able to hear her if she calls my name. In the steam, I practiced answers to the questions that would keep coming in bigger rooms. Why didn't you report sooner? Why did you run? Why can't you just forgive? I would not put the weight of my life on the word because. I would lay it on facts like bricks, one atop another, until they built a wall I could sleep behind. Late, when the house had done all its settling, and the camera's soft eye cast its silver on the driveway, a new sound broke the map. Glass ticked somewhere not quite inside, not quite out. Theodora was already up, hair in a knot, phone in her hand. We stood with our backs to the bathroom's solid door, counting seconds, listening for footsteps. The alarm didn't scream, it spoke. A quiet beep-beep that meant a window sensor had lifted a fraction and then dropped. On the screen, a shadow moved across the side yard. The kind of outline that knows where cameras begin and end and wants to dance in the seam. I held my breath until my lungs stung and then let it out, slow, like easing a latch you don't want to announce. Outside, a car door clicked. Tires whispered on asphalt. Theodora Isa's finger hovered over the panic macro that would send our address to 911 with a single press. We waited long enough to know we weren't being reckless. Then she touched the screen and the house found its voice. Somewhere down the block, a siren uncoiled and came toward us with the promise of blue. The alarm spoke in that almost polite chirp. One window sensor lifted and set back, like a fingertip testing a pulse. Theodora's face was already lit bluish by the monitor when I reached the hallway. On the side camera, a shadow skimmed the fence line, then flattened as if it had learned the geometry of our lenses. The house held its breath with us. Bathroom, Theodora said, not loud, not soft, the way a nurse gives a direction that has no argument inside it. We backed into the tiled room with the solid core door, and she pressed her phone screen. Our address flew to 911 without asking for permission. The alarm climbed from chirp to voice, a recorded woman announcing a perimeter breach like an etiquette lesson for criminals. Footsteps scuffed along the siding. Someone tried the kitchen window as if it might have forgotten itself and become a door. When it didn't, wood creaked somewhere closer, the sound of a frame taking weight it wasn't built to carry. They found the bathroom because bathrooms are where you put girls you're trying to corner. The knob twitched, then turned steady, then rattled until the screws announced their displeasure in a squeal. A man's voice came through the wood, greedy with performance. Open, Habibti. Don't make this harder. Your family misses you. Another voice murmured in a language that wore my bones like a coat. Not my father, he likes clean hands. Not my uncles. Too careful for splinters. Hired loyalty, the kind that invoices by the hour. I pressed my back to the wall and scanned the room for anything that could count as a weapon and found the small meannesses of bathrooms. Scissors, a metal pump bottle, a can of hairspray that hissed when shaken. The doorframe voiced a tight, quick crack like bad news. Tire noise rose on the street. A siren uncoiling, closer, closer. The pounding stopped. Footsteps retreated. Outside, a car door slammed with the conviction of someone who grew up believing doors were for slamming. The siren took the corner and spilled blue through the frosted glass. By the time the officers cleared the rooms, the men had become the idea of men again, smeared at the edges. Mud on the back step. A glove print ghosted on the glass. Theodora's cameras had caught enough to count. Height, gait, the sag of a jacket with something heavy in one pocket. The senior officer's questions were a metronome. What time? How many? Which windows? Steady enough that my pulse finally remembered a rhythm people can live through. Margaret arrived while the house still smelled like nylon jackets and cold air. Her blazer was wrinkled and furious. We're moving you tonight, she said. This placement is blown. Theodora didn't argue. She fetched the go bag she'd had me pack on day one and handed me socks thicker than the ones I was wearing. I put them on sitting at the edge of a bed that had been kind to me and felt the tug of leaving, a small grief that still knew its own name. Not regular foster, Margaret told the officers. We need someone who understands that these families don't accept paper as a wall. She made 3 phone calls, the kind that start with apology and end with gratitude. The answer came from a man who lived behind a different fence. Retired police, second-story apartment above his garage, floodlights and motion sensors, and a habit of sleeping light. We left the way people leave after a hurricane takes the roof, but not the bones. Slowly, touching doorframes as if they were shoulders worth thanking. Theodora rode in the front seat of the patrol car with a folder on her lap, watching our taillights like a mother stares at a school bus until it turns the corner. I sat in the back of the second cruiser and held the protective order on my knees, palms flat on it as if to keep it from floating off. The garage apartment smelled like lemon oil and vacuumed carpet. The retired officer, Mr. Diaz, had the posture of a man who had been the door before and knew how to be the door again. He showed me the panic buttons first thing, red caps under clear covers beside each light switch. "You will not need them," he said, "until the one time you do. Then you will be glad you practiced." He pointed out the cameras on his monitor: driveway, alley, back fence, stairwell, a shallow angle lens covering the very strip of blind spot where most men think they are invisible. "Learn these like exits," he said. He handed me a glass of water and did not ask anything else. The night didn't feel like sleep would come, so I sat at the little table and looked at my hands, at the maps scars make when you've been taught to carry heat with your bare fingers. Somewhere past midnight, the courthouse aired in my head, the judge's voice, the word permanent, a family turning their bodies into walls to make a hallway. And I thought of another kind of paper. Not court paper, but thin, furtive pamphlets that fit under doors without knocking. The first teacher's drawer. The phrases that parted systems. I reached for my new phone. Ms. Rodriguez answered on the second ring because teachers never stop being on duty. "Remember those pamphlets?" I asked, voice rough with tired. "We need more, not just pamphlets, guides, hidden pages, math problems that are really phone numbers, step-by-steps with exact words to say." There was a silence on the line that wasn't hesitation. It was a person fitting a new truth into a drawer already full and making room anyway. "We'll start tomorrow," she said. "I'll bring paper and a laminator, the cheap kind that burns edges if you go too slow." Morning found us in the apartment's square of kitchen, Mr. Diaz talking me through a schedule that rearranged risk into something like routine. "Vary your route every day. Never sit with your back to a window. Tell me if a car shows up twice." His voice had no impatience, only that precise kindness men sometimes learn after they see too much harm and decide to be a hinge instead of a hammer. Margaret called at noon with a small piece of relief shaped like a box to put smaller reliefs in. The lab had lifted partial prints from the fence cap and matched them to two distant cousins on my father A.S. side, men with small records full of petty loyalty. Warrants would be issued, she said, though she expected the men would bloom into interstate doubts before anyone found wrists to cuff. "It still matters," she added. "Paper is a wall, yes. It's also a map. We draw lines until a picture appears." That afternoon, the apartment became a factory. Ms. Rodriguez arrived with printer reams and a serious face. We drafted a booklet that looked like homework and read like exit strategy, a cover of boring blue. Inside, a fold-out with hotline numbers written as fraction problems. A list of mandated reporters disguised as a scavenger hunt. Scripts with blanks to fill in teacher names. A diagram of the courthouse that used the vocabulary of geometry to teach geography. We wrote the words that had opened doors for me in a way a girl could hold in two hands and hide under a mattress without attracting moths or men. The first finished copy came hot out of the laminator with an air bubble near the spine. I pressed it flat and felt a small pulse of something that wasn't triumph so much as proof. "If they move me again," I said. "This doesn't move with me. It moves ahead of me." Ms. Rodriguez nodded and slid the booklet into a stack with the care of someone setting down a newborn head. By evening, the street below us had returned to regular programming. Dogs, a delivery truck, a boy rattling a scooter over the same crack twice on purpose. Inside the apartment, the lights laid small puddles on the carpet, and for the first time since court, I could imagine a future that wasn't just the next hour. Mr. Diaz knocked twice, a courtesy in his own house, and said he would sit in his truck for a while to let the neighborhood meet his posture. "Sometimes the presence is the prevention," he said. "You sleep. I'll be the shadow that belongs to you." I slept, and when I woke, there was a list on the table in Theodora's neat print. Deliveries contacts a nurse she knew at a clinic who could place booklets in the right hands, a librarian who had seen enough to stop pretending. The order on my nightstand was still just paper, but now there was other paper too. Small and dangerous in the right ways, multiplying quietly like good rumors. Outside, the camera washed the driveway in low silver. The night had learned our names. We were learning it back. The booklet proved itself before we'd made a dozen. A knock at Mr. Diaz's door brought a social worker with a teen whose eyes jittered between the carpet and the window like birds trapped in a warehouse. She'd bled last week, she said, and by dinner a man old enough to be her grandfather had been discussed. She'd found a photocopy of our math problems in her cousin's room, decoded the fractions into a hotline number, and asked a nurse to call it. The nurse had. The girl now stood in our kitchen gripping a cup she wouldn't drink from while Margaret arranged an emergency placement 30 miles away. When they left, she turned at the top of the stairs and said, with a voice the size of a penny, "The map worked." If proof felt like fuel, my father's lawyer brought the match trying to burn it. He called a press conference on the courthouse steps and painted me as a recruiter, said I was corrupting minors and interfering with parental rights, asked for criminal charges like a man ordering lunch. Patricia responded without performance, statements from teachers and nurses about mandated reporting, a reminder that teaching children their legal rights is not a crime in any language the law speaks. "They want your silence," she told me after. "We'll give them process." The videos kept coming, brighter and slicker. Cousins sat straighter. Scripts polished their vowels. A new clip featured 4 of our shed girls arranged like organ pipes, taking turns accusing me of telling them their culture was evil. I recognized stage fright disguised as certainty. The comments did what comments do. Absolved parents, blamed Western rot, prescribed obedience as cure. Mr. Diaz nudged his ceiling with a broom handle to make me laugh, and it worked for all of 2 seconds. The first open threat arrived as theater. At dawn, a car nobody in the building claimed burned slow and hot in the far corner of the lot, a quiet orange tulip opening where cars do not open. Firefighters dragged a hose like a vein and laid it along the asphalt. When they cracked the trunk, the smell of scorched plastic and adhesive lifted in a nauseous whoosh. Inside, dolls in tiny white wedding dresses, faces puddled, veils fused to scalps, a row of melted eyes. Mr. Diaz swore in a language I didn't know and then in English so the report would catch it. "Message received," Patricia said when we sent her the photos. "Also, felony arson if they want to collect crimes like trophies." Margaret pushed for relocation again. I pushed back. "If we run every time they knock, the route becomes the story," I said. We compromised. Off-duty officers rotated through the block. Mr. Diaz got another floodlight. I learned to sleep in different rooms like a woman dating her own house. The booklet work widened. Ms. Rodriguez brought a nurse from a neighboring school. The nurse brought a counselor with a drawer of other maps that had saved other kids from other kinds of harm. We standardized scripts folded in county-specific addresses, listed which judges granted emergency orders more readily, not because they were saints, but because they'd seen enough to stop requiring girls to bleed in front of them to be believed. We slid packets into library returns, left them with trusted cafeteria workers, taped them under the seats of bathroom stalls where girls learned to carve phone numbers with a key. A call came from an unknown number with a voice that shook but did not break. 6 girls, ages 12 to 16, 3 already promised. Parents now watching for pamphlets like contraband after the Facebook storm. They used our code words back to me: red folder, mandated, emergency order, and a teacher's name we'd starred on our list. I gave them the courthouse geography in mouth-sized bites. Which door was less watched, where the cameras sat, the exact sentence that doesn't sound like panic to a clerk whose day is full of it. "If they catch us?" the caller asked. "You say it again," I said, "to the next adult, and the next, until one of them remembers what their job is." News of the network reached ears we hadn't planned for. Reporters who smelled a story that crossed 3 beats: immigration, crime, women's rights. A journalist Ms. Rodriguez trusted met us in Mr. Diaz's kitchen and agreed to write. Names changed, faces blurred. "We can protect identity," she said. "We can't protect you from blowback." "You sure?" I thought about the burning dolls blinking their pooled eyes in a trunk and said yes because shame likes darkness, and we debought a lamp. The week folded in on itself until a warning peeled it open. Anna, the girl who had been paraded in a ring, sent word through a legal aid lawyer that she needed to meet. In Patricia's office, thin and careful, she said my family had stopped trying to pull me back and started planning to make me an example. She didn't have the nouns, only the direction. Your school, she whispered. Something public. Soon. Fear arrived in a practical coat. Schedules changed, routes varied, an officer's car visible at dismissal. Then came the van. Mr. Diaz spotted it first from his truck outside the courthouse, where he'd gone to pay a parking ticket, and to keep the building in his peripheral vision, because old habits wear grooves. 2 ants flanked a girl with a face like paper. 16 maybe, skin too taut, step too short. They aimed at the entrance used for passport documents, not family court. I watched on a phone screen from the apartment and knew the choreography before they performed it. Out of state, I said. Maybe out of the country. We could not lawfully approach on the sidewalk. We could only become a camera. But girls learn tricks from each other the way water learns slopes. At the metal detector, the girl folded. Not collapse as performance, collapse as tactic, doubled, gasping, a hand clamped on the officer's sleeve with the desperation of someone who dememorized mandated an emergency and was using them as lockpicks. Her aunts insisted she was fine. The officer's face changed from bored to present, radio at his shoulder. In the movement that followed, the aunts tried to lift, the girl tried to stay on the ground, and a CPS worker appeared in the doorway like a sentence arriving on time. They took her somewhere past my line of sight where paperwork has more power than custom, and kept her there until the order could catch up to the danger. We did not cheer. We exhaled. Mr. Diaz texted a single period, the kind that stands in for a whole paragraph when men who have seen too much agree that sentiment is a luxury for later. I stood in the kitchen and cried without the drama of it, salt and relief making a small brine on my lips. Ms. Rodriguez pressed a stack of fresh booklets into a tote and said, "Back to work." The next morning brought a new tactic, a woman at the door with a brochure and a smile, representing cultural mediation. She suggested a supervised meeting in a neutral location where we could discuss love languages and intergenerational healing. Theodora listened with the face she probably used on patients who insisted cigarettes were medicine, took the brochure, photographed it, and shut the door without saying yes, no, or maybe. They change costumes, she said, tossing the paper into a bin labeled evidence. The script stays. It rained that evening, the kind of rain that polishes streets into mirrors. A car idled at the corner with its lights off and the window cracked. Mr. Diaz moved his truck into the spot behind it like he was being neighborly, which in fact he was. The car rolled forward. Another car took its place and then thought better. The street learned our synonyms for no. Patricia called to say the first anti-slap motion had been granted. They'll appeal, she warned, but it costs them money they'd rather use on show. She sounded like someone bailing a boat in a storm. Steady, arm-tired, still bailing. A national outlet wants your story, she added. We can say not yet, I said later. Not never, later. That night, I slept in the room without a window, just to learn if darkness feels different when there is only one way in, and it belongs to you. Morning, found Theodora humming Mr. Diaz, making eggs like the clatter of a fork on a pan could be a ward, and my phone lit with a message from an unknown number that began "I found your booklet" and ended, "Can you help me?" I didn't text back right away. I wrote the girl our details on paper first, as if ink could tether her to help, and then called with the voice I'd built out of sirens and pamphlets and the word permanent stamped on a court order. "Tell me everything," I said, and we began the map again. The week after the trunk fire, the rain quit pretending and came down like it meant to clean something. The city smelled rinsed, metallic, and green. In the space that weather left, our plans found edges. The article went live earlier than the editor first promised. Names changed, details sanded, but the bones intact. 1,000 quiet screens lit in kitchens and teachers' lounges and nurses' stations, and a story that prefers shadows had to squint. My father's lawyer stood again on the courthouse steps to accuse the heir of theft. He said the press lied, that I had been weaponized, that the community was under attack. He held up words like family and honor as if they were shields that could stop statute. What he couldn't stop was the way other women read. Emails slid into Patricia I.'s inbox from states we'd never been to. It happened here too. We can help with safe housing. Our clinic will stock the booklets. Payne sent postcards to itself and, for once, also sent maps. Thursday, the calendar rotated us back to court. Not because the paper was weak, but because permanence sometimes needs its temperature checked. The courtroom was different this time, not in wood and carpet, but in who filled the benches. My family's side had gaps like missing teeth. On ours sat teachers with lanyards, nurses in soft shoes, a librarian with a tote bag full of returns, 3 women who had once been girls whose fathers said mine and learned that a court can say no. Fatima drove 3 hours to make a second outline of herself in the back row, proof that ghosts can decide to be women again. The judge renewed the order in language that didn't try to be poetic. She didn't need to threaten. Statute threatens for her. She said the word continues and banged the gavel, and in that small ceremony a corridor opened that would not narrow overnight. Outside, a local news camera waited. Patricia lifted a palm without touching me and steered the story back to paper. "The order stands," she told the reporter. "That is the story today." We left before adjectives could sprout. In the quiet after, the Freedom Network stopped being an idea we spoke around and became a room we walked into. 15 people to start, Ms. Rodriguez with ink on her fingers, Theodora with a binder subdivided into smaller binders, Mr. Diaz with a map of his block, and 6 more blocks he, D, made a habit of watching. A cafeteria manager who had learned which girls linger by the dishwasher when they were trying not to go home. A coach whose whistle could scatter a hallway in both directions and make space for one kid to slip into an office. A social worker who collected the stories nobody wanted to hold and stacked them like evidence until someone with a badge had to look. We named tasks, not heroes. Distribution routes to school nurses and libraries. A list of clinics where the booklets could sit underneath a stack of magazines without getting thrown away. A spreadsheet, ugly, necessary, of county courthouses, which clerks were kind, which offices answered, which bailiffs waved kids through without making them perform panic twice. Theodora suggested a code on porch lights for neighbors willing to be safe harbors. 2 quick, 1 long. And by the end of the meeting, 3 porches on our street already blinked their language to the others. Girls arrived not in a line, but like rain. Uneven and enough. One with a backpack that rattled because she'd filled it with every key she could find, as if more keys would make a door appear. One whose aunt had shaved her head to delay her beauty, and discovered that razor blades can turn clocks backward. One who didn't want to leave at all. She wanted a judge to say out loud what her parents had done so that staying would mean something different. The network learned each girl's grammar and answered in it. The campaign against us didn't dissolve, it diluted. A man idled across from the building with a phone held just below window height and filmed the front door. Mr. Diaz moved his truck to adjust the shot. The man shifted and found Mr. Diaz's bumper. 2 minutes later, a patrol car unrolled into the space like an answer with no punctuation. Online, a cousin posted another video that hit its notes exactly and satisfied the choir that already knew the hymn. We stopped watching all the way to the end. We learned not to eat what made us sick. A week unspooled into the kind of ordinary you can only notice once you've had it taken. School bells, the dry squeal of sneakers on a gym floor, the smell of steam when you crack open a bathroom after a shower. I learned the particular bravery of showing up for algebra, of turning in a paper about the Odyssey without turning it into a memoir. Some victories require sirens. Some look like a grade that means you were able to concentrate for 43 minutes. We held the network's second meeting in a church basement that smelled like coffee and old hymnals. A poster board on an easel read, Freedom Network, not because we loved our own name, but because girls need nouns. We gave out packets tucked inside notebooks and showed the adults how to recognize a cry for help that sounds like a kid asking for a hall pass. The librarian taught us the quiet art of leaving things in obvious places where only the right eyes will see them. A lawyer explained again that emergency orders are not miracles, they're tools, and the miracle is in the hand that uses them. At home, Theodora taught me to make a soup that fixes nothing and makes fixing seem possible anyway. Mr. Diaz showed me how to change a tire so I would never have to stand on a roadside and wait. Ms. Rodriguez brought a stack of essays to grade and left with fewer because I could mark commas while the printer hummed out maps. We built a life with the parts people mistake for leftovers. My family, at some point, made it official. A newsletter announcement declared me erased, not just by 2 parents, but by affiliations that used to claim me for bake sales and funerals and playgrounds. In their world, erasure is a ceremony. They did not invite me. It landed when I let it, like a final hand flattening the soil over my name. Then the feeling changed. I realized I'd been living as if dead to them and alive to myself for longer than they could admit. Paper can make a wall. It can also mark a border you no longer have to cross. By the time the article hit a national site, we had numbers of our own, not to publish, just to hold. Girls in 3 states had copied our notebooks. 2 teachers had slipped red folders to nurses who knew what to do. A clerk at a courthouse 2 counties away started keeping a stack of emergency order forms in a drawer labeled supplies. Every tally mark was smaller than the problem and exactly the size of hope. Not enough, and still, everything. At night, the cameras still blinked. The order still slept on the nightstand. I still woke sometimes to a feeling with no object and waited for it to pass. But now, when the phone lit up with an unknown number and a small voice at the other end said, "I found your booklet. Can you help me?" I didn't feel like a girl being chased. I felt like a person opening a door she had learned to defend. I told her the words, the ones that open systems. Mandated reporter, emergency order, I am in danger today. I gave her the geometry of the courthouse, which line to stand in, which window to ask for. I told her to bring nothing that could be turned into a leash and everything that looked like school. I told her my name and said it the way people say names when they know they get to keep them. When we hung up, the house settled the way good houses do, small noises finding their assigned shelves. The porch light across the street blinked 2 quick, 1 long. A dog barked twice and then remembered us. I sat at the table with a pen and marked another quiet victory, where no one but us would see it. And in the morning, there would be more paper, orders signed, notebooks tucked, maps drawn to scale, and more girls who learned that saying no can be a sentence the world has to honor, not a wish it gets to ignore.